Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Tonight's broadcast is our very most listened to broadcast on the podcast app. But I went back and listened to the audio recording of it, and I wanted to add an update to this recording and give people an opportunity who haven't gone back into the archives to listen to this. This is a fantastic book. That what I like about it is it looks at life through a spiritual and philosophical lens, but really it mirrors so well the therapeutic or clinical lens. I'll warn you a little bit that tonight's slides are a little bit text heavy. So if you're watching this broadcast via the webinar, you'll notice that you can always ask for copies of the slides. And if you still have access to the parent portal, then you can download the slides associated with any webinar broadcast. For those of you who listen to the podcast app, you won't notice much of a difference because as I'm reading the slides, it'll sound like I'm just talking. Think of this as kind of a Cliff Notes version of Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. So let's get right into it. First off, let's talk about a cultural backdrop for his book and for these ideas. He talks about this group of folks called the Toltecs. And while some anthropologists might refer to them as a nation, really it was a group of people who came together and adopted a philosophy. Thousands of years ago, the Toltec were known throughout southern Mexico as women and men of knowledge. Like I said, anthropologists have spoken of the Toltec as a nation or a race, but in fact, the Toltec were scientists and artists who formed a society to explore and conserve the spiritual knowledge and practices of the ancient ones. They came together as masters and students of the ancient city of pyramids outside Mexico City, known as the place where man becomes God. So this group of people came together, and this is in large part what the Four Agreements is based on, is their philosophy and their awareness. More background, Don Miguel Ruiz talks about this idea that as children, we didn't have the opportunity to choose our beliefs. But we agreed with the information that was passed to us from the dream of the planet via other humans. The only way to store information is by agreement. In other words, we've taken this on. It may not have been a conscious choice, but now we carry on through life with the beliefs, the ideas that were taught to us, that were taught to our parents. And so this book is about raising awareness. I think it's really fascinating because this book really is about therapy. It's about the exercise of going in, looking at one's beliefs that one inherited from the air that they breathe, the experience that they had growing up, and then beginning to challenge them. The one thing I want to emphasize tonight is and we'll talk about it, it's more than just an awareness or an epiphany or an aha moment. One must develop a practice and have an experience that changes the beliefs that we take for granted, that are unconscious. With the fear of being punished or the fear of not getting a reward, we started pretending to be what we were not, just to please others, just to be good enough for someone else. In child development terms, we talk about the authentic self or the real self. And we talk about how we learned to be something for somebody else, principally our parents. Later on, it became teachers and peers. But it was the idea that if we showed our authentic selves, if we shared our truth, what we felt and what we thought and what we believed, that others would reject us. That when we were a burden to our parents, when we upset them or made them anxious or frustrated or disappointed, that we feared at some deep level that we were going to be abandoned. We pretend to be what we are not because we are afraid of being rejected. The fear of being rejected becomes the fear of not being good enough. Eventually, we become someone that we are not. Like I always talk about, this takes a great deal of courage to confront one's belief and to look back on it. I think so many people, this is important, so many people struggle with therapy because they expect it to be about new information. And that once there's an awareness of something, that we should be able to then change our way of living, our way of being. When again, in reality, these beliefs, these ideas are hardwired into us. Our neurology compels us to act and to respond to the world in a certain way. And so I talk about this a lot, how therapy starts after you give up hope, after you get tired of hearing yourself say the same things, and take the risk of showing up with an adequate therapist. Beyond that, that's when therapy really begins. We need, the author says, we need a great deal of courage to challenge our own beliefs. Because even if we know we didn't choose all of these beliefs, it's also true that we agreed to all of them. The agreement is so strong that even if we understand the concept of it not being true, we feel the blame, the guilt, and the shame that occur if we go against these rules. That's that wiring. That's that innate feeling that doing the right thing feels wrong. Because that wrong feeling kept us in line, protected us from doing something or being something that might lead to our alienation, our isolation, our aloneness. 95%, he says, of the beliefs that we have are stored in our minds are nothing but lies, and we suffer because we believe all of these lies. To be alive is the biggest fear that humans have. Death is not the biggest fear we have. Our biggest fear is taking the risk to be alive, the risk to be alive and express what we really are. And of course, we don't know what everybody fears, but I think that idea is so powerful. The fear of being yourself. It is a risk that we take that we're going to be responded to in ways that we've been responded to in our past. So it takes courage, it takes practice. Ideally, we find a safe place, a safe person to express ourselves. And if we have a different experience, if we're lucky enough to sit with an empathic other, somebody that can hear us, understand us, no matter how ridiculous we seem, we can start to repair those wounds and earn over time a new set of beliefs. Ruiz says we dishonor ourselves just to please other people. We even do harm to our physical bodies just to be accepted by others. You see teenagers taking drugs just to avoid being rejected by other teenagers. They're not aware of the problem. They're not aware that the problem is that they don't accept themselves. They reject themselves because they are not what they pretend to be. They wish to be a certain way, but they are not, and for this they carry shame and guilt. Humans punish themselves endlessly for not being what they believe they should be. They become very self-abusive, and they will use other people to abuse themselves as well. This explains so powerfully through a spiritual and philosophical lens what child development has told us psychologically, which is that children will sacrifice their authentic or real selves to take care of other people, or they will experience intense shame and guilt, fear. And so self-medication, escapism behaviors, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, avoidance, all of those things are an attempt to find a safe place. I remember just last year when I was working in a group as a therapist covering for my partner who was on a sabbatical for a couple of months. I remember that when groups merged together at one point while I was working, that there seemed to be an impact on the group that I was working with where the boys started swearing a lot. And I'm not necessarily anti-swearing all the time, but I was listening and paying attention. And I sat down with them after observing this for a few days, and I said, I would like to talk about this. Yes, we have a rule at Evoke where we don't use profanity. But really more importantly, I want to talk about what's going on. And really we just had a discussion about how these were scared and insecure 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old boys. And that swearing was a way for them to put on a mask and to fit in and to be accepted. And we didn't need to lay down a lot of heavy consequences. Every once in a while, I would talk about it, but for the most part, by and large, the vast majority of the profanity stopped after that group because we exposed it for what it was. We drew a line connecting the symptom and the feeling of insecurity and vulnerability. And your whole life, he says, has ever abused you. Oh, excuse me. In your whole life, nobody has ever abused you more than you have abused yourself. And the limit of your self-abuse is exactly the limit that you will tolerate from someone else. If someone else abuses you a little bit more than you abuse yourself, you will probably walk away from that person. But if somebody abuses you a little less than you abuse yourself, you'll probably stay in the relationship and tolerate it endlessly. Very creative and powerful ideas as we think about. I talk about in my first book about that idea that it's not that you have to love yourself so that everybody will love you. It's just that you allow people to treat you a certain way because of how you value yourself. And so as you heal and grow and evolve and start to feel more and act more as if you're worthy of being treated better, you don't allow it anymore. Not because you're threatening, not because you ask people not to or feign a boundary, but because they don't get to be around you. That goes for everybody. It goes for spouses, children, parents. As we heal, we require people to treat us a certain way to earn the gift of our presence. If you have an alcoholic, physically abusive spouse, you're going to walk away from that, right? Same with our children. If we don't treat them with capacity and kindness, eventually when they're not financially dependent upon us, they can walk away. Your whole life, he says, is your whole mind is a fog, which the Toltecs called mitote. Your mind is a dream where 1,000 people talk at the same time and nobody understands each other. In meditation, sometimes they refer to this as the monkey mind, right? All the voices in our head. When I talk to clients, I try to identify the various voices. Happens every session. Somebody will start to feel something or be confused about something, and I'll say, tell me about your thoughts. Tell me about what's going on inside your head. And you hear these shoulds and ought tos and being a good guy, being a good wife, being a good father, being a good mother, a good friend. And because they've been told how to be and what to feel, they don't know who they are and how they really feel. And that's the 1,000 voices in our minds that are talking that don't really understand each other. So therapy is sitting with somebody long enough, taking the journey long enough to be able to find yourself again. And to identify those other voices and be compassionate toward yourself as you uncover all of this work. So that's some background for the 4 agreements. Let's get into the 4 agreements. Let's talk about agreement number 1. Be impeccable with your word. So let's talk about what that means, because I think it might, like a lot of ideas, like a lot of concepts, it might not mean exactly what we think it means on its surface. He says, now let us see what the word impeccability means. Impeccability means without sin. Impeccable comes from the Latin, I'm going to try to pronounce this, peccatus, which means sin. The im in impeccable means without. So impeccable means without sin. A sin is anything that you do which goes against yourself. Everything you feel or believe or say that goes against yourself is a sin. You go against yourself when you judge or blame yourself for anything. Being without sin is exactly the opposite. Being impeccable is like not going against yourself. When you are impeccable, you take responsibility for actions, but you do not judge and blame yourself. I'm going to read that last sentence again. When you are impeccable, you take responsibility for your actions, but you do not judge or blame yourself. I'm going to repeat a story that I told last week to illustrate this. My mother attended a a public speaking event that I was speaking at. And my mother has a slight brain injury, so um, verbal concepts sometimes that go past her, get past her. She's very alert, and other than that, but that's sometimes words become a problem for her, especially the spoken word. So after listening to my talk, being very proud of me and telling everybody I was her son, she came up to me afterwards and she said, I'm starting to wonder if I made a lot of mistakes with you, if I should feel guilty for the harm that I did to you guys, me and my brothers. And I said to her, I said, you can be sure that you did things to hurt us. You can be sure that you did things that were harmful to us. There's no doubt about that. And I said, and me with my children. And whatever level that we're at, that's the truth. But I said, but you don't need to feel guilt about it. That's yours. The layer of guilt that you put on top of the mistake that you made has nothing to do with getting better, has nothing to do with growing, has nothing to do with making an amends to us, has nothing to do with being able to see yourself. In fact, I explained to her, the more guilt that you feel, the less able you're going to be able to see how you hurt us and to be able to be in a relationship with us where we're allowed to think and feel those things with you. I think that's so powerful and fundamental for the parents when I work with. See, this work helps to remove the barriers to self-honesty. And that's what the author's talking about here. You're accountable and responsible, but you do that without judgment or without blame, without shame, without guilt. And that seems so confusing to a lot of people in the early parts of this work. They don't know how to do one without the other. If they did something wrong, they should feel guilty. They should feel shame, they think. They should be to blame. But real good therapeutic work takes away the blame and the shame and the guilt so that you can get to honest and courageous and transparent accountability and responsibility. If I love myself, he says, I will express that love in my interactions with you. And then if I'm being impeccable with my word, because that action will produce a like reaction. If I love you, then you will love me. If I insult you, you will insult me. If I have gratitude for you, you will have gratitude for me. I talk about this with individuals who come to me looking to work on relationships with their children or with their spouses. I say, really, everything starts with the relationship you have with yourself. Every relationship in your life is built upon the foundation of self. And self and the development of self is when we tear away all of those other ideas, beliefs, shoulds and shouldn'ts to discover who you really are. And then how you treat others will be a more loving, generous, kind, compassionate example of how you feel toward yourself. Being impeccable, he goes on to say, with your word is the correct use of your energy. It means that you use your energy in the direction of truth and love for yourself. There's a story in the book that he shares about a mother who had a bad headache while her daughter was singing. And the mother says, shut up. You have an ugly voice. Can you just shut up? But the truth is that the mother's tolerance for any noises was non-existent. It was not that the little girl's voice was ugly, but the daughter believed what her mother said. And when we're small, we have a hard time fending and fighting off what big people tell us about ourselves. And in that moment, this little girl made an agreement with herself. After that, she no longer sang because she believed her voice was ugly and would bother anyone who heard it. She became shy at school, and if she was asked to sing, she refused. Even speaking to others became difficult for her. Everything changed in that little girl because of the new agreement. She believed she must repress her emotions in order to be accepted and loved. And that's the project, folks. That's what we're here for. That's why the impact letter that the child writes to the parents, in my opinion, is the most important assignment, not only at Evoke, but perhaps in all of therapy. And your ability to respond to it with capacity, understanding, love, tolerance, patience, acceptance is the most healing thing that you can do for your child. But what that's going to require of you is to get support. To get enough support to fill your belly up spiritually, emotionally, if you will, so that you can be there for the child when they tell you what a horrible, rotten monster you've been to them. And that doesn't preclude accountability and responsibility for the child, but the starting point is for them to give voice to their anger, give voice to their hurt, give voice to all the symptoms, the acting out stuff that's going on in their life, and to start with you. And we know that friends and boyfriends and girlfriends and teachers and others hurt them. We know that. Some more, some less. But starting with you is the key. One person who can be a adequate container, that's the clinical word, who can hold another person, a child, with patience and compassion and understanding. One person can make all the difference in the world. You don't need a dozen people to contain you. You need one. More is better, but one will do. And if your parents can't do it, or your spouse can't do it, or for sure your child can't contain you, go to a therapist who can. Miguel goes on to say, you can measure the impeccability of your word by your level of self-love. How much you love yourself and how you feel about yourself are directly proportionate to the quality of integrity and integrity of your word. When you are impeccable with your word, you feel good, you feel happy and at peace. I've shared this, and this is another part of my new book where the idea that people have, in fact, Maya Angelou is credited with the idea, she didn't quite say this, but many credit her with the idea that if I knew better, I would do better. Many people think that. But really what I think it is if I felt better, I would do better. Right? What drives us principally is our emotional state. Everybody in the sound of this broadcast can relate to knowing something intellectually and not being able to follow through with it consistently or instantly. But when we feel better, which takes a lot more work, a lot more healing, a lot more of this uncovering the fog of the mind and the thousand voices. When we feel better, we do better. Let's move on to the second agreement. The second agreement is don't take anything personally. Again, not the same way we would necessarily think about these words. So let me explain what he explains. Personal importance, or taking responsibility, taking things personally, is the maximum expression of selfishness. By the way, I wouldn't use that word. I'm not a fan of that word because for various reasons, but that's his word. It's the maximum expression of selfishness because we make the assumption that everything is about me. Nothing other people do is about you, is because of you. Nothing other people do is because of you. It's because of themselves. All people live in their own dream, in their own mind. They are in a completely different world from the one that we live in. When we take something personally, we make the assumption that they know what is in our world, and we try to impose our world on their world. So, when your child tells you you're a monster, they're telling you about their mind, their dream, their world. Your ability to listen to that with patience and compassion is your ability to see and connect to them, plain and simple. To the extent that them calling you a monster in whatever form that looks like, and to the extent that you react, you're making it about you, and you're unable to see them. And you react with defenses or anger or frustration or hurt or guilt or shame. And then they know you are not safe and that you're asking to be taken care of. That's the psychology of this second agreement. Even when the situation seems personal, even if others insult you directly, it has nothing to do with you. What they say, what they do, and the opinions they give are according to the agreements they have in their minds. I will just say it this way. I never ask you not to feel the hurt that you feel. That's what parents hear in some of this sometimes an imperative, what you should do. What I talk about and teach is that the more work you do and the more capacity that you build up to, for example, hear somebody and see somebody, it doesn't hurt anymore. In the moment that I'm living this second agreement, somebody could say or do virtually anything to me and it doesn't hurt. I'm not ignoring or repressing a feeling. It doesn't hurt. But that didn't come from the simple idea. That came from work, from unraveling the idea that I was taught when I was a child, that when somebody was upset, principally mother or father, when somebody was upset with me or happy with me, it was about me. And guess who taught me that? Mother and father. They told me that when they were upset, I was doing wrong. And when they were happy and proud, I was doing right. And I accepted that agreement. I agreed to it. And now I'm spending the latter half of my life, the second half of my life, trying to let go of that. Spending time with my therapist who says the exact opposite, who I experience an experience that is the exact opposite. It's not important, Miguel says, to me what you think about me. And I don't want to take what you think personally. I don't take it personally when people say, Miguel, you are the best. And I also don't take it personally when they say, Miguel, you are the worst. He even goes on to say, even if you hit somebody in the face, it's not about you. And again, that takes a great deal of work to arrive at the place that he's talking about. This is like a something to aspire to. But to arrive at the place that he's describing, like I said, there's a whole lot of healing and exploration that one needs to do. He goes on to say, you may even tell me, Miguel, what you are saying is hurting me, but it's not what I'm saying that is hurting you. It is that you have wounds that I touch by what I have said. You are hurting yourself. Again, the more healed that I am, the less it hurts when you do something. And I can say that that's been my experiences as a therapist, as a husband, and a father. And I have a life's journey ahead to go. Because in my most compromised moments, I take everything personally. In my most compromised moments, my wife can just give me a certain look and I'm enraged. Or my children can say something to me and I'm triggered. More on not taking it personally. As you make a habit of not taking anything personally, you won't need to place your trust in what others do or say. You will only need to trust yourself to make responsible choices. You are never responsible for the actions of others. You are only responsible for you. When you truly understand this and refuse to take things personally, you can hardly be hurt by the careless comments or actions of others. The more I'm aware of this, the more capacity I have, the more that what my wife and my children do and say to me, the more clearly I see their injuries, their hurt, their struggle, their pain. And I can even recognize sometimes my impact on that, but that's different than owning it. And recognizing my impact on that, for me, leads to compassion, making an amends, and being generous. You can ask for what you need. You can say yes or you can say no, whatever you choose, without guilt or self-judgment. Right? That's a tall task. I think more for mothers in our culture than for fathers. You can choose to follow your heart always. Then you can be in the middle of hell and still experience inner peace and happiness. You can stay in your state of bliss and hell will not affect you at all. I said that I think it's more for mothers because mothers are taught, are wired, are encouraged, are reinforced by the culture to value themselves, to measure their happiness, their worth by how well the children are doing. Not so much fathers. And while that's not universally true, and that gender or parental split is not always the case, I want to have compassion for what I think women are challenged with and the messages that they're given in our culture. It goes back to that adage that I always challenge, that the idea that's in our culture that you're only as happy as your least happy child. And not only is that adage not challenged, but sometimes it's spoken or shared as an ideal to strive for, when in reality, it's utter insanity. It's placing responsibility for the parent's serenity and happiness on the child. Yes, we hurt when those that we love hurt. Yes, we grieve when those that we love are sad and hurting and struggling. But that's different than having a fundamental sense of serenity and peace. Let's move on to the third agreement. Don't make assumptions. We create a lot of emotional poison just by making assumptions and taking it personally, because usually we start gossiping about our assumptions. We are afraid to ask for clarification. We make assumptions and believe that we are right about our assumptions. Then we defend them and try to make somebody else wrong. It is always better to ask questions than to make an assumption, because an assumption sets us up for suffering. Right? More dialogue. That's part of the value of the communications model that we have, and the I feel statements and reflective listening, is it creates a format, a structure to go beyond the initial impressions, reactions, and assumptions. Assumptions are made so fast and unconsciously most of the time because we have agreements to communicate this way. We have agreed that it is not safe to ask questions. We have agreed that if people love us, they should know what we want or how we feel. Right? That sounds a lot like codependency. When we believe something, we assume we are right about it to the point that it will destroy relationships. It will destroy our relationships in order to defend our position. We look for evidence to support us. If our son is being an irresponsible, selfish person, if our husband or wife is being a neurotic, crazy person, and we feel very injured and hurt by that, we will look for and point out evidence that supports that. We make the assumption that everybody sees life the way that we do. We assume that other people think the way that we think, feel the way that we feel, judge the way that we judge, and abuse the way that we abuse. This is the biggest assumptions that humans make. And this is why we have the fear of being ourselves around others, because we think everyone else will judge us, victimize us, abuse us, and blame us as we do ourselves. So even before others have a chance to reject us, we have already rejected ourselves. This is the way that the human mind works. There was a quote that I saw that I think I shared on a broadcast not too long ago that says, "The first thing that you should know about me is that I'm not you. Everything will make a lot more sense after that." That's that quote that I love from Gandhi that says that going home, fusion, is easy, but loving another's otherness is heroic. It's the quote that I've shared that says, sometimes to understand somebody else, you have to lose your mind. In a very real sense, you have to abandon how you think about the world to be able to see somebody else and to hear their story. I remember the first time my therapist asked about one of my assumptions. This was 15 years ago. I said to her, I think that people love you when you take care of their needs. So that's what I'm here to do. And she said to me, had this quizzical, curious, confused look on her face, and she said to me, I actually think it's possible to take care of yourself, to not abandon yourself at the level that you're describing, and then somebody can still love you. And I thought she was being either stupid or playing a game with me. I really did. I thought she was crazy or dumb. And now it's been my life's work to learn how to be myself and take the risk that that's not going to be okay. And when I found a wife, and I have found a wife who can tolerate me, it means everything. And it started off with a therapist who could tolerate me. Often when you go into a relationship with somebody you like, you have to justify why you like that person. You only see what you want to see. And you deny that there are things that you don't like about that person. You lie to yourself just to make yourself right. Then you make assumptions, and one of the assumptions is, my love will change this person. But this is not true. Your love will not change anybody. If others change, it's because they want to change, not because you can change them. I think this is a great example of the psychotic nature of romantic love. Right? The idea that we can change somebody, that somebody else completes us and can make us happy, and that it's our job to make each other happy. And with the parenting relationship, this last part of his quote, that your love will not change anybody, that's the essence of codependency, right? We give our love to our children or to others with the expectation that they'll give us something back in return. That's not really love. That's a social contract. So parents will ask me, well, if you can't change anybody, then why do all that we're doing? And number one is because it's what it means to be an authentic self, and it's the only contribution you can make to your child. The most important contribution you can make to your child is to be an authentic self and to love as unconditionally as is possible for you, and then to let go and not be fundamentally in charge of whether or not they change. And that is true connection. To love as unconditionally as possible and to not be attached to the other person changing. That is the most powerful definition of connection. It tends to have really positive effect on others. The way you keep yourself from making assumptions is to ask questions. Make sure communication is clear. If you don't understand, ask. Also, I think that's a lot of what parents struggle with listening, is we think we know everything. We think we know more than our child, right? We keep our mind in the equation and we tell them the way that it really is, and we're right. Instead of understanding the world through their eyes and ears. Find your voice to ask what you want. Everybody has the right to tell you no or yes, but you always have the right to ask. Likewise, everybody has the right to ask you, and you have the right to say yes or no. That's something that I talk about with clients all the time. Clients in the field, students in the field, parents, couples, you can ask. And they're allowed to say no. And you're allowed to say no. Sometimes I've heard therapists or staff make the suggestion. Ask your parents. Have you asked your parents that? Have you asked your spouse that? And there seems to be an implication that if they ask assertively and in the right way, that the other person has to say yes, has to meet the need or the request. And of course, that's not true. Don't make assumptions, Miguel says. Just saying this sounds easy, but I understand that it's difficult too. It's difficult because we so often do the exact opposite. We have all these habits and routines that we're not even aware of. Becoming aware of those habits and understanding the importance of this agreement is the first step, but understanding its importance is not enough. It's not just insight. Information or an idea is merely the seed, the beginning. What will really make the difference is action. Taking action over and over again, developing a practice over and over again, strengthens your will, nurtures the seed, and establishes a solid foundation for this new habit to grow. After many repetitions, these new agreements will become second nature, and you'll see how the magic of your world transforms you. That's part of why therapy takes time. I can't tell you. I thought about this leading up to the broadcast tonight. It's something that I say all the time. And it's not from a place of shame or guilt or blame. There's nothing you can do that's more valuable to helping your child than to do your work. Doesn't fix them, doesn't solve everything, but it fixes you. It solves you, if you will. And the impact and the ripple effects of that can be profound. Most importantly, you reduce suffering in your life. Let's talk about the fourth agreement. Always do your best. Under any circumstance, always do your best. No more and no less. No more and no less. But keep in mind that your best is never going to be the same from one moment to the next. Everything is alive and changing all the time, so your best will sometimes be high quality and other times will be not as good. Just do your best. In any circumstances in your life, it doesn't matter if you're sick or tired. If you always do your best, there's no way you can judge yourself. It's a tricky way of saying it, but what he's saying is the dialectic that I talk about in the book, which is you're always doing the best you can and you can do better. It's really a Buddhist idea of non-judgment. It's knowing that when you do high quality work, and sometimes I show up as a father, as a friend, as a therapist, as a husband. Sometimes I show up in a way that I'm really proud of. That's really amazing. Sometimes I show up in far less impressive ways. But if I think about it in terms of I'm doing my best, it's not going to abdicate responsibility for trying. It doesn't do that. That's what people are afraid of. People don't know how to go through this life without shame and guilt. We weren't taught that way. We were all taught that's what helps us. But the reality is if we have the non-judgment, if we're kind to ourselves, if we think about it in these terms, we'll be better off. There was a man, this is a story from the book, there was a man who wanted to transcend his suffering, so he went to a Buddhist temple to find a master to help him. Master, if I meditate 4 hours a day, how long will it take me to transcend? The master looked at him and said, if you meditate 4 hours a day, perhaps you will transcend in 10 years. Thinking he could do better, the man then said, oh master, what if I meditated 8 hours a day? How long will it take me to transcend? The master looked at him and said, if you meditate 8 hours a day, perhaps you will transcend in 20 years. But why will it take me longer if I meditate more? The man said. The master replied, you are not here to sacrifice your joy or your life. You are here to live, to be happy, and to love. If you can do your best in 2 hours of meditation, but spend 8 hours instead, you will only grow tired, miss the point, and won't enjoy your life. Do your best, and perhaps you will learn that no matter how long you meditate, you can live, love, and be happy. And I think about this for parents, right? Sometimes because we love our children more than we love anybody, we try so hard. But we forget that it's also our opportunity, maybe even responsibility and privilege to live a happy life too. And we don't have to beat ourselves up or over practice. We're allowed to be happy even when people are suffering and struggling, even people that we love. When you do your best, you can learn to accept yourself, but you have to be aware and learn from your mistakes. Learning from your mistakes means you practice. Look honestly at the results and keep practicing. This increases your awareness. And remember, and this is me talking now, guilt will prevent that. Guilt will prevent awareness and self-honesty. The first 3 agreements will only work if you do your best. Don't expect that you'll always be able to be impeccable with your word. Your routine habits are too strong and firmly rooted in your mind, but you can do your best. Don't expect that you will never take anything personally. Just do your best. Don't expect that you will never make another assumption, but you can certainly do your best. Can you hear the compassionate perspective that most of us weren't raised with necessarily because people were trying to motivate us through other means? By doing your best, the habits of misusing your word, taking things personally, and making assumptions will become weaker and less frequent with time. You don't need to judge yourself, feel guilty, or punish yourself if you cannot keep these agreements. If you're doing your best, you will feel good about yourself even if you still make assumptions, still take things personally, and still are not impeccable with your word. So if you fail, do not judge. Do not give your judge the satisfaction of turning you into a victim. No, be tough with yourself. Stand up and make the agreement again. Okay, I broke my agreement to be impeccable with my word. I will start all over again. I'm going to keep the 4 agreements just for today. Today I will be impeccable with my word. I will not take anything personally. I will not make any assumptions, and I'm going to do my best. If you break an agreement, begin again tomorrow and again the next day, and you will. It'll be difficult at first, but each day will become easier and easier until someday you will discover that you are ruling your life with these 4 agreements, and you'll be surprised that your life has become transformed. This chain of training from human to human, from generation to generation, is perfectly normal in human society. You don't need to blame your parents for teaching you to be like them. What else could they teach you but what they know? They did the best they could, and if they abused you, it was due to their own domestication, their own fears, their own beliefs. They had no control over the programming they received, so they couldn't have behaved any differently. There is no need to blame your parents or anyone who abused you in your life, including yourself. But it is time to stop the abuse. It is time to free yourself of the tyranny of the judge by changing the foundation of your own agreements. It's time to be free from the role of the victim. The real you is still a little child who never grew up. So this work, like therapy, is about making progress and being human and doing our best to remove and fight off the old messages of guilt and shame that we believed, that we agreed with. You know, when I teach about shame and guilt, people are pretty good with shame, but when I teach about guilt in the world, even from therapists, even from famous therapists, nobody believes me. And yet it's so evident. It's self-evident. Every person that disagrees with me, who still has the belief that guilt is something that they should hold on to, that keeps people to do the right thing, every one of them have example after example after example where doing the right thing caused them to feel guilt. And they avoided doing right things because they felt guilty. They avoided awareness and honesty. They avoided loving in a compassionate way, loving themselves and loving others. They want to talk about healthy guilt as if that's something we can find. So it's all of us. It's out there. The Toltec masteries. Awareness. This is to be aware of who we really are with all the possibilities. Transformation. This is how to change, to be freed from the agreements of our childhood, our context. Intent. For the Toltecs, it is the same as the mastery of love. The first step in all of this is to become aware of the fog in your mind. Part of the project of therapy is to sit in a different context. This is what your children are going through. It's only out of our context that we begin to recognize our context. The fish is the last one to discover water. The next step is to develop an awareness of the self-limiting, fear-based beliefs that make you unhappy. And we don't know them. We know we're unhappy, we know we're suffering, but we don't know. We're afraid to go back and look where those came from. It's a betrayal of others. We think we're going to get stuck in blame or victimhood. And if we can go back and look at how others hurt us and dented us, then the implication of how we hurt and dented those who came after us is all the more heavy on us. Going to the core of those agreements is what I call going to the desert. This is Miguel talking. When you go into the desert, you meet your demons face to face. And in our program, you literally go into the desert and sit by yourself. And you literally, or I guess I should say figuratively, end up meeting your demons face to face. Forgiveness is the only way to heal. We can choose to forgive because we feel compassion for ourselves. We can let go of the resentment and declare, that's enough. I will no longer be the big judge that goes against myself. I will no longer beat myself up and abuse myself. I will no longer be the victim. First, we need to forgive our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, and God. Again, it's hard for us to be compassionate towards ourselves. It's hard for us to forgive ourselves. We're afraid if we forgive, then we're going to live a lawless life. And we believe and we're taught that the only way to live a moral life, a good life, a life full of love and kindness and connection, is to beat ourselves up for our mistakes. Fighting things, the things that suck energy from us. The big difference, Miguel says, between a warrior and a victim is that the victim represses and the warrior refrains. This is similar to what I was describing. The idea that it's not about not feeling, it's not about repression, it's about being able to master oneself, about having a strength. That's different than repressing or denying a feeling. The warrior has control, not control over another human, but control over one's emotions, control over oneself. A couple of more ideas from the book. One of the ideas is the initiation of the dead, embracing the angel of death. That is what, in the Toltec way, the angel of death teaches us. This is about impermanence. This is what Buddhists would call impermanence. The angel of death comes to us and says, you see everything that exists here is mine, not yours. Your house, your spouse, your children, your car, your career, your money, everything is mine and I can take it away when I want to. But for now, you can use it. And that's a great gift for us to realize it's all temporary and it's not ours. And we can then live in joy and peace and find heaven here on earth. They call this the new dream in the Toltec way, or heaven on earth. Miguel says, I want you to forget everything you have learned in your whole life. This is the beginning of a new understanding, a new dream. Imagine that you have permission to be happy and really enjoy your life. Imagine living your life without fear of expressing your dreams. Imagine living your life without the fear of being judged by others. What I like to say to people is just imagine what it would be like if it was okay to be you. Imagine living your life without judging others. Imagine living without the fear of loving and not being loved. Imagine living your life without being afraid to take a risk and explore life. Imagining that you love yourself just the way that you are. So the take-homes. The take-home is this is all possible now. It really is. It takes work. It's not a light switch. It's not an intellectual idea. But it's possible. Here, now, today. Moses called it the promised land. Buddha called it nirvana. Jesus called it heaven. And the Toltecs call it a new dream. But there's really no reason to suffer. The only reason you suffer is because you choose to suffer. If you look at your life, you will find many excuses to suffer, but a good reason to suffer you will not find. The same is true for happiness. The only reason you are happy is because you choose to be happy. And again, it's not a conscious, simple choice that he's describing. He's talking about the choice that comes by creating new habits. Walking into therapy, walking into an Al-Anon meeting, dedicating yourself to listen to the podcasts, or read some of the books that are being recommended, to go to a therapy, to get a sponsor. That's what it means. That's the choice. Happiness is a choice and so is suffering. Maybe we cannot escape from the destiny of the human, but we have a choice to suffer our destiny or to enjoy our destiny, to suffer or to love and be happy, to live in hell or to live in heaven. My choice, he says, is to live in heaven. What's yours? All right, I'm happy to take any suggestions or any comments or questions that have come in. Very good tenets for all of us. Parents follow them, and then more importantly, how do we get our sons and daughters to do the same? You don't. You don't, that's not the focus. You just do your thing. And by letting go, ironically, they tend to change. The best thing you can do is to not try to change them. Ironically, that doesn't mean you're passive and do nothing and don't send them to Evoke. That just means you don't occupy your mind with them changing, and they will change. And you can't trick yourself and say, well, I'm going to pretend not to occupy my mind. But that's the magic. When you change the project from raising good children to being a better person, it changes everything. First and foremost, your suffering that comes from your belief that your love can change them. But in the end, children tend to respond to that kind of parent, the parent who focuses on themselves instead of the child as the most important project to be working on. Children tend to respond to those parents by flourishing. With children that are manipulative and unable to acknowledge their own part of the situation, a young adult who is using substances, where's the line between listening and validating their feelings and setting a boundary where you won't let them repeatedly and endlessly blame you? How do you take care of yourself if you don't have the capacity to not take it personally or judge another? That is a really, really great question. And let me do my best to answer that question. I'll answer it with a story. Somebody asked my son, because I sent him to Wilderness when he was 13. He's 26 now. Somebody asked him if he held a resentment for me for doing it, and he almost looked confused by the question. And I don't do a lot of things right, but one thing I do pretty consistently is my children are allowed to hate me and think I'm the worst parent ever. We have an agreement in our house that Dad's an idiot, and everybody's on board for it. And so I never have an investment in them in being right or good, and they get to feel. And so the confusion that my son felt was it didn't make sense to him because it wouldn't have mattered. It would have been okay. He didn't need to hold on to it and keep doing it because he could have said it once and I say, you're probably right, I'm sorry. I did the best I could and it might have been a mistake. So part of that repetitive blaming is in the relationship. But when you let go of it, it goes away. Now, I will tell all of you this as clearly as I can. You're allowed to set a boundary. If my children nag me, if they become repetitive about something that they want or something they don't agree with, I'm allowed to say, you have to stop now. Not because you're wrong, it's just because I don't want it. I can't do it. See, you listen and listen until you can't. But that's the difference between trying to fix them and get them not to blame and being a self. I'm going to say that again. You listen and listen and listen until you can't, until you've reached your limit. And then when you reach your limit, you set a boundary. You don't set it to change them and to teach them not to blame. You don't get invested in them not blaming. They'll figure that out on their own. But you show up as a self, and that's different. You say, this is me, this is my limit. I might be crazy or stupid or old-fashioned or neurotic. In fact, I'm probably all of those to some degree. But this is me and my limit. I'm not right, I'm just Brad. And that's how we live our lives. So you do it until you can't. And you get to set a boundary when you want to. And you'll find over time that your capacity expands wider and wider. Like I said, I have more capacity now because of my work than I did 10 years ago. But I still have limits. And you better believe all of my children can find them at times. One parent writes and says, this is the most profound webinar for me. I'm glad. It's an amazing book. I love when somebody from a different discipline teaches and talks about something that matches this discipline of therapy, of psychology, because it's like learning the same thing from two different languages, right? It's learning the same thing, looking at it from a different perspective through a different lens, but it's the same truth. It's the same awareness. So thank you. It's a powerful one for me too. All right, folks. One of those things that you can do, go to a 12-step support group. We ask all families, all parents, to go to 6, a minimum of 6, while their child is with us. If you haven't started, go as soon as possible. You can go online. You can go to Al-Anon or CODA or Families Anonymous or Adult Children. and go and listen to what other people who have loved ones who are self-sabotaging, self-harming, addicted, listen to how they're navigating. And by the way, they're not talking about the other. They're talking about them and their suffering and how they're trying to get rid of that or escape it in a positive way. RefugeRecovery.org is a recovery program with meetings for people that might have a problem with a higher power. If that's one of your barriers to the 12-step work. You can also go to NAMI.org to get free classes and resources in your local area. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app. On your iPhone, check your podcast app. On your Android device, download the SoundCloud app and search Evoke Therapy programs on both. You can also look at these online by going to soundcloud.com and searching Evoke Therapy programs there. On Twitter and Instagram, you can follow us using the handle at Evoke Therapy. And you can also find the Evoke Summit Lodge, that's our intensive program, on Instagram using that handle. On Facebook, find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs. You can also find the Alumni Foundation, a group of alumni parents who gather together to help raise money for people that couldn't afford therapy. So you can support there, give service, raise money, volunteer, donate. The Evoke Therapy blog is a great resource for new content all the time. My book, my first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, is available through Amazon. You can go to the Amazon page and underneath the paperback tab, click on the new options and buy it directly from Evoke Therapy until it gets back in stock in the Amazon warehouse next month. If you want to do a deep dive, if you're ready for this, Finding You is the place to do it. Something I do every year for myself somewhere else. Finding You is a 4.5-day intensive where you look at all the things that we've been discussing tonight personally as they apply to you. If you've been to Finding You, you can come to Finding You too. June 9th through 13th, I'll be running that one. Find out more by going to our website or calling our toll-free number or emailing intensives@evoketherapy.com. I'll be in London on May 1st, New York on May 13th, and Toronto on May 22nd. Email Melanie@evoketherapy.com for more information. We would like all current families, parents, to go to at least one workshop if they can. You can combine that with a visit to see your child if the therapist at Evoke thinks it's the right time. Contact Melanie at Evoke Therapy for more information. Pursuits trips are international trips all over the world, adventure, fun, think therapy light, sober fun for young adults or for families, run by our staff. Any other questions? One more comment it looks like somebody has. He says, you are never responsible for the actions of others. However, I feel it is my responsibility because of my attachment issues with my parents that led to the subsequent attachment issues with my son. That is difficult to accept. Absolutely. We can see the relationship. We can follow the chain. I know I've dented my children. I know my mother dented me. We can just do it without the blame, without the shame, without the guilt. We can do it with honesty and courage and love and compassion and awareness and generosity. And it is difficult to accept because we weren't taught to accept these kinds of things without those harmful emotions on top of it. So absolutely, I can relate to it. Everything you just said, I could say the exact same thing out loud. All right, folks, I'm going to be in London next week speaking to parents and professionals there. So I'll be out of town. We'll announce the upcoming webinar broadcast soon. I haven't selected a title yet. It'll be Monday, May 6th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Hopefully I won't be too jet lagged to do it. Monday, May 6th, 2019, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Look forward to talking to you then. I hope these points are helpful. Go out and buy the book, buy it online, buy an audio version. It's a great set of ideas to begin your practice. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you when I get back. Bye-bye.